Asylum in 2025 isn't just harder, it is being redefined. Tougher screenings, tighter standards, and decisions that turn on the smallest details. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on what's really changing. Welcome to Immigration Talk Show, everyone. I'm your host, Rajni Bharara, and with me is someone whose expertise in asylum law is rare at any level, Catherine Motolenich Torres. She spent over 15 years shaping, training, and practicing immigration law across federal government, nonprofit organizations, and private practice. Former supervisory asylum officer, refugee training officer, director of legal programs, and now a leading attorney handling some of the hardest asylum and appellate cases. There are very few people who understand the system from the inside the way she does. So, without any further ado, let's welcome Catherine for the first time on Immigration Talk Show. Hi, Catherine. Welcome to Immigration Talk Show.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And before we start the show, I would like to read a very important disclaimer for our viewers watching. By watching our videos, you agree and understand that the information provided by our experts and attorneys, including comments and replies from the users, is not legal advice. Use of information is at your own risk. Okay, so after this important disclaimer, welcome back, everyone. And like I said, we are going to discuss asylum today with Catherine. And it's her first time on the show, so make sure to give her a very warm welcome, like I did. And if you have any questions regarding asylum or maybe deportation or anything regarding your immigration case, make sure to drop your questions in the comment section. And yes, we'll be asking your questions directly from Catherine. And I can see people joining us. I think a couple of people have already joined us. So welcome back. And we are live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. So make sure to like this video, share this video with anyone who needs to know about asylum rules and how is asylum changing in 2025. So make sure to do that and also subscribe to Immigration Talk Show. And I know you guys are waiting to hear from Catherine, so I'm not going to take any more of your time. Let's quickly again go to Catherine and ask our questions. So Catherine, once again, welcome back. And
Thank you.
I hope you're excited.
Very excited.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Catherine, before the show, we were talking about, we would like to begin the show by if you can talk about, the history of asylum. And with the history of asylum, also if you can explain how has asylum rules and how has asylum changed in 2025?
Sure, that's a great question, and it's a good place to start. So, asylum law, especially in the United States, has a pretty long history. Before the 1950s, there really wasn't any kind of asylum law per se. It was really on a case-by-case basis. A lot of it was politically motivated. It really started with people fleeing from what the U.S. considered to be communist countries. It really became something a little bit more concrete in the 80s with the creation of the Refugee Act. And it's gone through a couple of different iterations since then, getting stricter and also getting things that are a little bit more difficult to prove whether you qualify for asylum or not. But essentially, asylum means that you are what the US considers a refugee, which means that you are being persecuted or will be persecuted in the country you are from, the country you have citizenship in, due to your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion, or if you're a member of a specific group that's being targeted. For example, certain families or certain people who may be part of the LGBTQ, groups, those types of particular social groups. And what's been happening lately since starting in the 1980s is things have slowly become stricter. So in 1998, we had the Convention Against Torture, which allowed for, if you didn't quite qualify for asylum, there might be other forms of relief. 2005, there was the Real ID Act, really clarifying what kind of evidence and what was needed to prove if you were an asylee or asking for asylum, among other immigration changes that were made. And then post really 2018 is when it really started to kind of tighten a little bit more. And what you had were these different transit bans and what you're seeing today. So it's all kind of started to escalate a little bit incrementally to make it sometimes a little bit more difficult for people to be able to prove that they would qualify for asylum. And that's where we are today.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, that's gold nugget of information. Thank you for getting into the detail and telling us all of that. But when was the first time when a person legally, seeked asylum and was approved?
So it's been happening since the 50s, right? So the Immigration and Nationality Act started in the 50s, and then pre 1950, as we said, it was more kind of a case by case basis. So what you really did see back in the 1950s and before were politically motivated asylum. So if people were political opponents in one country, were seeking refuge in the United States, the government would look at that on a case by case basis. This idea of almost anybody, right, could qualify for one of they're called nexus. So one of the reasons that you can get asylum, that's newer. That started in the 80s, and with the convention, and then the 1967, and then to 1980 with the convention, the Refugee Convention with the UN, as well as kind of the Refugee Act here in the United States. So to answer your question, probably for somebody seeking asylum in the way that we understand asylum today, that probably started in the 1980s.
Okay, okay. Catherine, you also said earlier, I mean, when it started, it was basically politically motivated.
Yes.
But then, when you say politically motivated, what were the intentions behind at the time, and how did it change over time?
That's a really good question. So when we think about in historically the political motivation, it's exactly what we think about when we think about politics. Presidents, governors, people who are in charge of governments in other countries, things happening in those countries against the government, those people then wanting to come to the United States to be safe. So that was the traditional idea of what political motivation was. That's changed, thankfully, and now it is more open, and you don't necessarily have to be working in the government. When they talk about political opinion, what they're saying is broader. It can be your personal political opinion. If somebody wants to harm you because of your opinion, or because they think you have that opinion, so it can also be imputed, it can be believed. They can just believe you to have this opinion. That opens up for you to have asylum. So the main thing with asylum law is that you're being persecuted, you're being harmed on account of one of the 5 reasons. And the very first one, and the one that I think people are most aware of, is that political opinion claim. Starting off again with you were actually in the government, or actually were active in politics. And now it's grown more towards somebody believes you to have this political opinion, or you actually have this political opinion, even if you don't have a role within the government.
Okay, okay. Thank you for answering the question, Catherine. Next, I would like to know from you that what are the main changes to asylum rules we have seen recently? For example, the final rule by Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice that restricts asylum eligibility for certain unauthorized entrants.
Yeah, so a lot of things have been happening in 2025. So I think what you're talking about is the circumvention of lawful pathways that actually started under the prior administration and has really been used in this administration as well. It's a final rule, and it says that there is this presumption that you are not eligible for asylum if you entered the southern border without permission. So that, or you try to kind of go around legal pathways. So when we're talking about people who entered without inspection, and the dates for that are people who entered between May of 2023 up until May of 2025. And that is what they are saying there, is if you entered and you didn't have permission to enter, and you didn't use the lists, and there's the CBP1 app, and you didn't try to get an interview at that border, then you do not qualify for asylum. Now, there are ways to try to combat this, but that's generally the rule that they've been using to kind of quell what they believe to be this, influx of people requesting asylum at the southern border.
Okay. So do you think because of these changing the initial screenings or maybe the interviews that are happening later are also, being harder now?
Yeah, so a lot of things have been happening. So the good thing about asylum law is that it is written law, right? It's not a
Yeah.
policy, and so there are things that we obviously as a country have to adhere to, and that can't just be taken apart just because of the political ideas of one party or the other party. And so that is good. But there are things that are happening to make it more difficult for people to be able to request asylum. So one of the things is the circumventing of legal pathways, trying to quell the alleged kind of influx of individuals seeking asylum. There's also the idea that there is a lot of asylum fraud,
Yeah.
which I don't necessarily believe the numbers are there, but that is a narrative that is happening where they believe that people just ask for asylum for the sake of asking for asylum, but proving that you categorically should be given asylum is difficult. And so it is becoming more and more difficult because they are limiting the individuals who, number one, can apply for asylum through these legal pathways. Number two, this one's been going on for a while, but the 1 year filing deadline, right? So you have to have filed your asylum application within 1 year of entering the country. And
Mhm.
more recently, and kind of happening a little bit more bit by bit, is the Board of Immigration Appeals and the immigration courts determining that specific groups don't necessarily fall within what is called the particular social group. So those groups that sometimes don't fit into religion or political opinion or nationality or race, but they are being targeted for other reasons. Those groups are being looked at, and the laws and the case around those groups in 2024 has become more difficult. One recent example would be there many females,
Mhm.
many women, many people who identify as women coming from certain countries are being targeted because not only because they are women or because they are unmarried women or they're women viewed as property. There are all these things that are happening within the society where they're living that makes them a target and their government can't protect them. And that is being kind of pulled back, and it's being made more difficult to determine whether a woman in certain areas under certain conditions would qualify for asylum based on what's happening to her in her country.
Mm, okay, okay. Great that you mentioned about this narrative where people are also misusing, taking asylum. But Catherine, so I remember watching this video where the people were saying that how people are now, especially now, are misusing asylum. What in the video was shown was that there are a couple of people who come to the country and come to the US or maybe other countries too, and they follow these illegal routes, say donkey route or maybe other routes they follow. They enter the country and later they seek asylum, or maybe if they have come through the right way also, then what they do is after being in the country they don't have enough paperwork to prove themselves as legal, so then they try to seek asylum saying they are not safe in their country, so they also follow all these routes. So as an immigration attorney, do you also see things happening like these around you, or is just a narrative which is being propagated on social media lately?
That's a good question. I'm not going to say that there isn't fraud. I think that any government program, any law, anything that people can take advantage of, there is the potential for fraud. I think that it is
Hmm.
not anywhere near as this idea that it's just every single asylum application is fraudulent. So,
Mhm.
definitely, there are situations where either on the part of the individual who believes that they're just going to file this claim even though they're not afraid. That does happen, but there are also these networks of individuals who say that they can get people work permits or claim to be immigration attorneys or say that they prepare documents for immigrants. And what they end up doing is, without the individual knowing what's being filed, is that they are filing these asylum applications, because years ago it would take 5, maybe sometimes 10 years to get your asylum application approved or looked at, or your interview. And so during that time, individuals could have their work permit. So what you had were like these insincere individuals who were taking money from people who believed that they qualified for a program, not explaining the program, and then filing fraudulent documents with asylum, right? And so most of the fraud that you might think about or you might find within the asylum application and in the United States, a lot of it has to do more with these individuals filling them out for other individuals and lying without the actual immigrant knowing what's happening. A lot of the people I have spoken to that have been victims of this are told, I went in there, it was an office, they told me I qualified for a work permit, so I signed a piece of paper and that was it. And when they start seeing what's happening, when they get to the interview position, they're completely taken aback and they say things like, I didn't write that. That's not what I said. And so that you do see. And again, I'm not going to say that there isn't fraud. I think that any program, that is a possibility, but there is a pretty strong vetting system for asylum cases. There is a pretty strong training for the asylum officers, the people that are conducting these interviews and that are doing the background checks. So I don't believe it to be the big issue that a lot of, the media or the propaganda or the things are saying that it is.
Okay, okay. But what about these? All these immigrants who follow illegal path to enter the country, like the donkey route, okay, and then they seek asylum. They ask the attorneys and the government to help them to get into asylum, and they seek asylum. So, do you think a person who is entering the country, to an illegal way, and then asking to stay in the country legally, do you think it's correct as an immigration attorney?
I'm not going to tell you what I think personally. I think
Okay.
that that's outside of the purview of what we're talking about. I will say that the purpose of asylum law is to protect people who are fleeing their country. And when you're fleeing your country, when you are in danger, it is not
Mhm,
always possible or practical to get a visa.
mhm,
If you're in a war-torn country, you may not have your documents. You may not
mhm,
have the ability, there might not be a consulate, there might not be an embassy. You might not have, your money might be frozen. There are so many things that could happen to an individual who is just trying to get to safety, trying to get their family to safety, that I think that we
mhm,
should pause and understand that there is in asylum law, there is no requirement that you enter lawfully into the country. Had that been a requirement, that would have been put in
mhm,
the law. And so I think we need to be a little bit mindful with the narrative that people are taking advantage or that they are trying to somehow rig the system or do something untoward because they had to flee, right? Again, immigrate, like the asylum law starting in the 70s, in the 80s, it's gone through a couple of different changes, and not once has it required a lawful entry because of what
mhm.
it means to have to live and flee from a war-torn or dangerous place. Sometimes getting here lawfully is not possible.
Wow, very well put. Thank you so much for taking that up, Catherine. This is, I don't know if I can call it a personal question, but as an attorney, I would like to know from you that, sometimes you might also be finding yourself at crossroads about when, you get someone who you want to help to get, someone who's seeking asylum who you want to help, but then also are confused whether you should help them. I'm sure you must have also been into a situation like these. So how do you identify who to actually help in these cases and who maybe not to, or I don't know how to put it, but I hope you get my question.
Yeah, so I think what you're trying to ask is how can we tell if it's a real asylum
Real,
claim?
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
right, right.
So
Absolutely.
to be honest, there's going to be a lot of situations and when the attorney will never 100% for sure know, right?
Mhm,
Fraud can be very basic. Somebody
mhm,
speaking a lie. It can be very complex with like fake documents. You could have fake
right.
reports, right? So
Mhm,
what I try to do and what every I think attorney tries to do is to follow their ethical requirements, the requirements that we as members of the court are required to uphold, and to make sure that we feel that what we are presenting to the court or the officer, or in this sense to USCIS and to immigration, is accurate, right? And
mhm,
so there are a lot of tools that a lawyer has where is if they feel that the information that was provided to them is inaccurate, that they can choose
mhm,
to remove themselves from the case, right? And so we do have a
mhm,
lot of ethical duties in order to maintain our licenses, to make sure that we're not lying to the court, we're not assisting in any kind of fraud or anything like that as
mhm.
well.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much again for taking
Of
that
course.
up and answering the question, Catherine. Okay, so also I would like to know from you. I see a lot of people posting their questions too. Maybe how about we take viewers' question and then we can get back to our question.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so Vinu is here, and Vinu says, how has the 2026 DHS and USCIS asylum eligibility changes specifically impacted Indian and South Asian applicants, and what common pitfalls should they avoid during credible fear interviews?
That's a really good question. I 2026, 2025, kind of like in flux, right? We know that things keep kind of getting more difficult for individuals all over the spectrum of immigration. If we're talking about eligibility specific to India and South Asia, I would say that it's kind of the same as everybody else, in the sense that these particular social groups are being looked at a little bit more, and they're being pulled apart, and they're not being accepted as much. And so you may still have situations where individuals, for example, women viewed as property, or women who are being, trafficked in some way, that has become a little bit more difficult to prove. As far as specifics to the nationalities and the groups that you're in your question, there isn't anything that I am aware of that has come out specifically targeting those specific groups. The other part of your question is also very good as far as the credible fear interviews. And so, if I don't know if we have a minute to just kind of briefly talk about what a credible fear interview is, but basically what that is it's kind of like a pre-interview, right? So let's say that you have been stopped by ICE or by immigration for whatever reason, and you indicate that you are afraid to go home. You're afraid to go back to your country. So what you are doing is you're saying, I am afraid. And so US law requires that an asylum officer give you what's called a credible fear screening. It's almost like a precursor to a full on asylum application, an asylum interview, where they're just getting very broad information as to what your fear is and whether it is tied to one of the reasons that you can claim for asylum. And so those interviews can be very difficult. They're very quick. They can be difficult in the sense that they usually don't happen in person. They happen over the phone. An individual may or may not be detained. They may or may not have access to an interpreter they feel comfortable with. They may or may not understand the kind of like the legal system that they're stepping into, especially obviously being from a different country. It's a different legal system. And so my best advice for those credible fear interviews is, if you have the opportunity to have an attorney with you, by all means try to do that. You do have the right to request that your attorney be present. The attorney can help navigate you through that, make sure that if the officer isn't asking you the necessary questions to make sure that you get your story out there, the attorney can also ask you questions and provide that information. As far as pitfalls, one thing have that I noted and have noticed is that people talk, right? So you might have somebody that says, I said XYZ at my credible fear interview, that worked. Oh, you should say XYZ because, that is something that might help you. And so my best piece of advice is to just be honest and clear about the reasons why you specifically are afraid. You do not want to be put in a position where you are not sure about what it is that you are claiming because you're afraid, but you don't know perhaps the specific name of the group you're afraid of, but then somebody else has used a different name. So you just want to make sure that if you don't know some information, you're very clear and you say, I don't know that information, and that you just speak from your personal perspective of what you are afraid of.
Also, Catherine, do you think it is harder getting asylum now, especially in 2025 with all the changes and policy changes? I mean, and the rules and regulations that are coming up, especially with different kinds of visas. Do you think now it is getting harder for people to seek asylum?
I think so. And I think it's kind of for two reasons. Number one, as we've talked about, kind of the circumvention of legal pathways, the cutting down of these particular social groups. It's making it a little bit more difficult for people to fit into one of the reasons where they can access asylum, right? That's one piece. The other piece is the high rate of detention that we're seeing now versus maybe a year ago. And so when a person is detained, everything becomes more difficult. It is more difficult to communicate with your lawyer. It is more difficult to communicate with your family. Instead of a case taking 2 years in front of an immigration judge, you're being asked to submit all of this information, all of this documentation really quickly, which can be difficult, especially if you left your country and you're leaving with nothing, right? It can be difficult to get those pieces of evidence. And so the entire system has become just both through access wise, it's become more difficult to access attorneys and to have the time that you need to fully prepare for these types of interviews. And then also all of these policy shifts have made it a little bit more difficult about whether you would qualify or not.
Okay. Okay. And with these new changes coming out, what kind of barriers are people facing in 2025 with asylum?
So we've talked about the circumvention of legal pathways, so making sure that we know what that is. There's also now more of they're starting to use the third country rules, where basically what they're saying is if you can be safe in a third country, even if it's not your country, if you can be safe in another country in which the United States has this agreement with, where this country is willing to accept individuals who we are saying cannot get asylum here, but perhaps can get asylum in a third country, then that is another option, which is very difficult, right? How is it that you are expecting an individual to go to an entirely third country where they may not have any family, any, kind of any roots, any understanding of the legal system, when they've somehow they've made it here, right? If they've
Yeah.
made it to the United States, it's for a reason. It's either because they have family here, they understand the asylum process, they have some tie to the United States versus, for example, Honduras, right? And
Mhm.
so that has also made it difficult. And what we have seen is that has really kind of made people more fearful of requesting asylum, this fear that they will just be picked up and put in a completely different country that they might not even know the language, or have any ties to.
Mm. And which groups are impacted the most by these added hurdles?
So the it can be anybody, right? Like at this point, there is no kind of, we're still seeing how this is playing out, whether how immigration is going to be using these third country kind of agreements, but you don't have to be from any specific country to be sent to one of the countries. And so, for example, you could be from You could be from El Salvador and sent to Honduras, or you could be, South Asian and sent to Honduras. It really just depends. They just want, as long as what they're saying is prove that you cannot be safe in this third country, and then you can come and we can talk about asylum here. So it's making it that much more difficult, right? So not only do I have to now prove that I'm not safe in my country, I have to now somehow prove that a country I've never been to, that I might not know anything about, I'm also not safe there, which can become a legal impossibility for a lot of people.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much for answering all these questions in so much detail, Catherine. Thank you so much. And guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation. It's a really insightful conversation that I'm having with Catherine. And if you are, make sure to like this video, share this video with someone who you think can benefit also from all these information, and make sure to subscribe to Immigration Talk Show. Right now, it's time for me to again move to your questions. So let me take viewers' question. The next one that I have got is from Richard, and Richard says, what legal strategies or documentation can H-1B workers and international students use to strengthen their asylum claims under the new standards, especially if they fear persecution upon returning home?
That's a really good and relevant question, because I know that the H-1Bs are also going through these big policy shifts as well. And there's been all of this kind of turmoil with the student visas as well. What I will say, and I think it's important to note, Richard, is that the asylum laws and requirements are the same for everybody. Okay. That's a good thing. I know I'm not trying to dodge your question, meaning that just because you were able to get a student visa or an H-1B visa doesn't mean that you might not qualify for asylum. If you are afraid to return to your country, then evidence of that is going to be the same for everybody. Now, might the specific types of evidence be different? Absolutely, right? So, for example, if work is the reason that you are afraid that you might be targeted, then obviously any kind of evidence about the type of work that you do, the type of work that you used to do back home that you're doing here now, basically what you want to do is any documentation or anything that links why you're afraid to your home country, that's going to be very helpful. Same with students. And what I've seen in a lot of student cases that later on go on to asylum is this politically motivated kind of targeting of educated individuals and individuals who have studied abroad as well or worked abroad as well. And so what you're seeing is people are fearful they might be losing their student visas, but they can't go back home because now maybe things have drastically shifted back home. Maybe the government has changed. And there's this idea that if you are from the United States or have all these political opinions that might be different than what is actually now happening in your country, that you might be in danger. And so those pieces of evidence as well, that's going to be country conditions and human rights reports and evidence of your status, evidence of what you've studied, evidence of if you have a podcast, if you have Twitter, if you have kind of any social media where you are expressing those beliefs or making it known that you have these beliefs. All of that can work as evidence. And so what I say to a lot of people is, document that. Document it. It might not seem like a big deal in the moment, but you never know. And so asylum cases are not built like with one giant solid piece of evidence. These cases are built brick by brick. Every little piece of evidence goes together to make us what's happened to you. And so saving all of that information is super, super helpful.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Richard, for your question. I hope you've got your answer. If you'd like to know more, make sure to post your question, follow-ups in the comment section. Meanwhile, let me take Venkat's question. Venkat says, for families currently in removal proceedings, what are the most effective appeal options available under the 2026 asylum framework? And how can they prepare for success in immigration court?
That's a really good question. I'm glad that it came up. So there you can appeal, right? And so effective appeals are going to be those that are timely, obviously, and then those that are based on what happened in your specific case. And so it's super, super important that you have either legal guidance or guidance and an understanding of what it means to appeal a case in front of the Board of Immigration Appeals, specifically for asylum, but also broadly in other immigration cases. Your reasons for appeal are essentially if the immigration judge made a mistake of fact, they didn't understand or they didn't analyze a fact of your case correctly, or a mistake of law. They interpreted the law incorrectly, or usually a combination of the two. And so, for it to be an effective appeal, it's really important to have an attorney who has experience writing these appeals and presenting these appeals in front of the BIA, but also has experience in the underlying type of case that you have. So if you're appealing an asylum claim, you want to make sure that your attorney feels really comfortable with asylum law, right? It doesn't always mean that it has to be the same attorney who did your case, but should have to be somebody who really understands what the law is and the facts of your case. And so that's going to be the best way for you to make sure that you are effectively appealing. Before we move on to preparing for immigration court, I do want to say that immigration appeals right now are taking a long time. So you have 30 days after the decision to submit your appeal, but then it could be a couple of years before that appeal is finalized with the Board of Immigration Appeals. And so it is a process that does take a while, and it can be a little bit frustrating for people. For immigration court, a lot of my advice is going to be very similar, is to make sure that you have representation that, number one, has an understanding of how immigration court works, right? It's not criminal court, it's not civil court, it's an administrative body, and so the rules are a little bit different. You want to make sure that you are being represented by somebody that understands that. For an asylum specific case, you want to make sure that you have somebody that understands both asylum law, but also has a pretty good understanding of the reasons for your specific asylum claim. So what you will see is there's a lot of fantastic attorneys out there that will specialize in either countries or specialize in groups of individuals where they've really amassed a lot of knowledge about what is happening to those specific people being targeted or inside that specific country. That is always super helpful as well. Having all of your documentation in order, having everything timely filed with the immigration court, that's all important. My biggest pet peeve as an attorney is not communicating, right? Sometimes I'll have a client who will bring me their first set of documents, and then I don't hear from them and I can't get a hold of them. And so the best thing that you can do for your immigration court case is to take an active role. Just because you hired an attorney doesn't mean that you don't have to be active and participate. Not to speak ill of any attorneys, but to be real, your case is one of many cases for me, but your case for you is your entire life and your entire case, and nobody is going to protect that better than you. So make sure that you find representation and an attorney that you feel comfortable talking to, that you feel comfortable with the explanations that they're giving to you, and that you can effectively work together. That's going to be the most important way to prepare for immigration court.
Okay. Wow. That's one amazing detailed answer. I hope it helps you, Venkat. I hope you are finding this conversation and all these answers that is being told by Catherine really helpful, and I really hope it helps you. So thank you so much for being here. And if you would like to post more of your questions, please continue posting them in the comment section. We'll be more than happy to take them. But meanwhile, let me take ZQ's question. ZQ says, "Hello, attorney. Could you give a short list of the countries that are out of the asylum list? My country is facing problems politically, so I was thinking of leaving with my family."
That's a really good question. I don't know if I'm understanding. Maybe you can clarify in an updated question. There are no countries that don't have asylum available, right? So there are no countries in the sense that there are I don't know if maybe you're mixing travel bans with the idea of requesting asylum, but asylum is for anybody who is here in the United States who is afraid of going to their home country. There is no list of countries that cannot apply for asylum.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Maybe ZQ, you're getting it confused with the travel bans because there was a list that came out regarding the
Yes.
travel bans countries,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. And obviously, if you're from a country where there are travel bans, it might be difficult to get here. So, yes, I
Mm.
understand that that might be where the two are meeting. But if you are in the United States, it doesn't matter what country you're from, you can request asylum.
Okay. Okay. Again, thank you so much, ZQ, for your question. Maybe you can continue posting your follow ups if you have any. Meanwhile, let me take Joe's question. Joe says, Dominicans trying to enter USA by way of Puerto Rico. Can you help?
Yeah, so Puerto Rico is part of the United States. And so anybody that enters Puerto Rico also has the same ability to claim asylum. And there are USCIS offices and immigration courts in Puerto Rico as well. We have our offices there as well for a reason. And so, again, the same rules apply. Anybody who sets foot in the United States has the right to request asylum if they are afraid of returning to their country.
Mm, okay. Well, Joe, I hope you have got your answer too. Samantha's question says, how do the 2026 asylum rule changes affect individuals who previously applied but are still awaiting a decision? Will they be reassessed under the new standards?
So I'm going to give you a very lawyer answer that nobody likes. It depends. I know nobody likes to hear that, but unfortunately, that is what's happening. And so it really will depend on when you applied and where your specific case is and what unfortunately the specific standard is, right? Some of them are retroactive. So for example, we just saw a case come out about the third country that's retroactive to 2019, I believe. And so it can go backwards. Other ones are not going backwards, right? And so the circumvention of legal pathways, for example, that one's not going backwards. That's from 223 to 2025. And so they can't go back now and say, oh, but you entered in 2022, but now there is
Mm,
this new program. So it's really going to depend on what the issues are in your specific case. And my recommendation there is to, if you have an asylum application pending, if you have an attorney, go ahead and make an appointment with your attorney. Ask those are great questions to ask your attorney. They should be able to answer those specific to your case. And if you don't have an attorney, you can call our office. You can find a more local, good attorney that does immigration and asylum law specifically, and they should be able to look at your paperwork and tell you if any of the new standards are going to apply to your case.
okay. Okay. Samantha, thank you so much for posting your question. And let me quickly move to Robert's question too. So Robert says, are there any protections or exceptions in the 2026 framework for LGBTQ plus asylum seekers or those facing gender-based violence in their home countries?
Again, lawyer answer yes and no, in the sense that gender based asylum claims are being looked at a little bit more strictly, in the sense that gender alone isn't sufficient to be a nexus or like the reason why you are being harmed, right? It cannot simply be because you're a man or because you're a woman or because of your gender identity. But having said that, it's a little bit different than the LGBTQ plus framework, which hasn't changed and is still a protected group of individuals. And so if your gender identity and your gender presentation don't match in the sense that quote unquote supposed to match in your home country, right? I'm just using what the norm is in your home country, then and that is the reason you're being targeted. That is still a valid reason for asylum, right? When we're talking about the more restrictive look at gender based claims, we're talking more about someone being harmed for the only because they are a woman, only because they are a man, not because they are a woman and, right? So there's still that and of like other identities that are protected under asylum law.
Okay. Okay, Robert, thank you again for your question. I hope you have got your answer. And this is a great conversation that we are having here, Catherine. I hope I could continue this conversation, but like we are at the end of our time. But we still have a lot of questions pending, and like I said before we started the show, whenever you are available next, I know you are busy, but whenever you can make time and are available next, we can do another episode and continue with the rest of the question. How about that?
I would love to. I'd happy to come as many times as y'all would have me, and to talk about this or other immigration topics that anybody might be interested in.
Thank you so much for saying that. Thank you so much. You're being too kind, so thank you again. And
Thank you
it
all.
was lovely having you. So, guys, if you want to get in touch with Catherine, there is this link which we are being displayed continuously on screen. We are again going to display it on screen. It is going to direct you to Catherine's website. So here is the link. Please click on this link and you're going to be directed to Catherine's website, and there you can find her contact details. And if you're looking for an attorney for yourself regarding your asylum case, make sure to get in touch with her, because you can find it out from her answers. She has great insights in her answers, and I'm sure she's going to be of great help to your immigration case. So right now, please don't delay. Right now, get in touch with her and make sure to find all her contact details in her website. So, and yes, thank you for being here, Catherine. It was lovely having you. It was your first episode, but it didn't feel like one. So thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for being here too. And also, you guys had some great questions. I'm hoping to see you all very soon. But until I see you all again, make sure to like this video, share this video with anyone who you think can benefit from all these asylum information, because asylum is something which is trending right now. I mean, people are really looking forward to get a lot of insights on asylum topics. So make sure to share it on your social media and with your friends. And also don't forget to subscribe to Immigration Talk Show. I'm your host, Rajni Bharara. I'm going to come back very soon with another topic with Catherine. But until I am back, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And also take care of yourself. Bye.